It is not correct to, it's not nice to always start a meeting with an apology, but with a company, SOC Limited applications. There are 3 applications that we are considering today. I'm the full-time regulator member, primarily responsible for electricity regulation. I'll be the chair. But I'd also like to introduce my fellow members, starting. Unfortunately, also, we do have 2 members that one is on leave, and unfortunately, other happens to stay in. It doesn't have to, but perhaps he may just indicate briefly what happened, and it's not about operations. But I'd like to start and indicate that Ms. Nomfundo Maseti therefore will not be able to join today. But on the panel, we have Mr. Muzim Kiza, who is a full-time member of the regulator. Also present is Ms. Precious Sibia, who is a part. Show your face and greet. Thank you, madam.
Everyone.
Okay, thank you. We will be joined later by Mbani Pokula, who is the members of the electricity subcommittee that form the panel today. Just to indicate this day, the BL, National Independent Newspapers, which is the Pretoria, the Cape Times, and the Mercury, and all of the NESA social media platforms, and also on the NESA website. The hearing is held in accordance with the National Energy Regulator Act, in which all affected parties are given an opportunity to submit their views and to present relevant facts and evidence that will assist the regulator. The hearing itself is governed by the NESA rules on public hearings. Will be allocated 15 minutes for a presentation so that they can detail the actual application, especially in this case, separate types of licenses. So we've afforded them 40 minutes to be may pose their questions, send their questions to, should the presenters wish to present information they consider confidential, the panel will make a ruling on of section 810. It will be done through our recording system, but there will also be a live audio of this meeting. The House rules, very simple. Please, if you are presenting, please put your cell phone on silent so that it doesn't ring. Unless you are making a presentation. That's a request and a plea from us. Please ensure that your mic is off at all times. Thirdly, the chat function is enabled. How function be used responsibly to contribute to a meaningful discussion throughout. The first one, of course, being ESCOM, but as we will then afford ESCOM the right of reply, and they will be given a further 20 minutes to respond to anything that they may deem they would like at this session. However, of course, and will respond to everything that has been said in writing. But that is the program for today, and therefore, without much further ado, I'd like to then ask Mr. Sikomusho, skip and show your, if you can switch on your mic. Mr. Skippers, thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair. I trust you can hear me.
I can hear and see you. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Skippers. Can I start with you and ask first an oath, or kindly raise your right hand and affirm the following? Do you solemnly declare that the evidence or the information that you are going to give to this panel is the truth and the whole truth as you know it?
I work for ESCOM. I'm the group executive for transmission. I'm also a director on the National Transmission Company. Thank you.
Thank you. You may proceed. You've got on the 3 license applications, and your 40 minutes starts now. Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I appreciate the opportunity. Chair, I'd just like to indicate that I will cover certain parts of the presentation. I am not sure whether you could guide me, Chair.
I think it might be better that we swear them in right now, so that at least you'll then have a smoothless transition between yourself and them.
Thank you very much.
Kindly show their, yeah.
All right, Mr. Kleinans, if you could come on screen and then hand over to the next colleague. Thank you.
evidence or the information you're going to give to this panel is the truth.
Responsible for performance management. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Mr. Clements. The next one, Mr. Skeppers. Who's next? Do you solemnly declare that the evidence or the information you're going to give to this panel is the truth and the whole? In that case, kindly state your name and the organization that you are representing today and your designation in it, please.
Keith Bowen from Eskom Transmission, and I'm Senior Manager Market Operator. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Bowen. The next person.
To blame Ms. Ragni Ramkumar.
No objection.
All right. In that case, can you for the record, please state your name, the organization you are representing, and think. Ms. Fortbaum, would you object to taking an oath?
No, I don't, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. In that particular case, kindly raise your right hand and declare the following. Do you solemnly declare that the evidence or the information is the truth and the whole truth as you know it?
I do. And my designation is Trading Accounts Manager. Thanks.
Chair, this is the last person. Mr. Arzad Ram.
Mr. All right. Would you object to taking an oath? Okay.
Advocate, you are muted.
I don't object to taking the oath, Mr. Chair.
All right. In that case, kindly raise your right hand and affirm again, just state your name for the record and your organization and your designation, please.
Azar Baum, I'm an advocate practitioner. I'm appearing on behalf of Eskom at these proceedings, instructed by Edward Nathan, South Africa.
I'll run through a few slides and then I'll hand over to my colleagues as appropriate. Nico, could you bring up the presentation, please? Thank you very much. If you could go to the next slide. Chat we will be applying for, and a quick overview on the financial aspects that we believe are relevant, and then we'll conclude. If we proceed to the next slide. That document outlines was the government's intent to restructure a rated utility through functional and separation, and ultimately to there's a few pointers there in terms of the overview around what is the greatest, and there's potentially additional markets and product over time where necessary for its market, but that's something that will follow in due course. Chair, one of the key to highlight is that this has been a long and complex process, and that we have endeavored to manage it so that we do not disrupt operations, and that the key stakeholders are appropriately informed and taken along on this journey. On the next slide, Chair, we just give a highlight of some of the key achievements on the journey that we've been on. Subsequently, we registered National Transmission Company South Africa, SOC, as a subsidiary of Eskom Holdings. And this entity, which we'll just refer to as NTC going forward, relevant PFMA approvals from Department of Public Enterprises and from National Treasury. We have had a cycle of engagements with lenders that we concluded in at the latter end of the second cycle now, very advanced stage, and current indications are that we'll receive the lenders' consents by the end of April 2023 or soon thereafter. In terms of staff, the staff will be transferred from Eskom to NTC in terms of Section 1, and this will be done upon fulfillment of various suspensive conditions, of which licensing is one. If we move to the next slide, just around the applicant, National Transmission Company South Africa is a wholly owned subsidiary company of Eskom. NTC has its own board of directors who will dance with the Companies Act and the PFMA. There is work in progress to appoint a board of NTC Transmission Company. South Africa have concluded a merger agreement pursuant to sections 113, 115, and 116 of the Companies Act number 71 of 2008, in terms of which the transmission business The next slide indicates the scope of the licensing, and these licenses are being applied for in terms of the Electricity Regulation Act 2006, a transmission license, a trading license, as well as an import and export license. The required effective date for the NTC licenses will be on fulfillment of the merger agreement suspensive conditions, and we have referred to this as the licensing effective date. And so subject to the license applications being advised NESA on the required licensing effective date for the licenses, Eskom is willing to relinquish the existing national transmission license in favor of NTC. Highlighting here are the key activities that require licensing. So in terms of the national transmission, fall within that scope include that of the system operator, which is responsible for managing the network service provider, which is responsible for the refurbishment, maintenance, and operate transmission network, and to provide non-discriminatory network access for generators and consumers. As we the network service provider, this comprises grid expansion planning, and among others, this is a function that produces the transmission development plan. Under the trading license, the functions that we envisage is the purchasing of energy and capacity from IPPs, as well as selling energy and capacity to Eskom distribution. And lastly, in terms of this has to deal with in the context of
as indicated, I'm going to be covering just an overview of the NTC transmission licensing. Eskom Holdings transmission license are included in this application, and that is the transmission network service banner and also the grid code secretariat function. In summary, Chair, very similar, almost identical to the Eskom Holdings transmission license is being applied for. In terms of the different roles, the transmission network service provider role is to provide, maintain, operate, and manage for maintaining and operating connection agreements with all entities connected to controlling and operating the power system in accordance with the requirements and provisions of the System Operation Code, the power system, which include code requirements. This includes the compilation of the transmission development quotations to customers for new and modified connections to its network. The customer agreements for the directly connected customers will be established to the NTC as follows. User system agreements have been compiled and agreed to between NTC and Eskom Distribution and Generation, and these will then be concluded just prior to the licensing implementation date. The existing Eskom Holdings transmission connection and user system and international connected load customers. In terms of the transmission use of system charges, exclude energy sales and purchases. These charges are proposed, and as they are presently levied, tariff code and includes the generators, importers, distributors, loads and exporters that are directly connected to a transmission system and consequently receiving transmission network services directly. In terms of the proposed tariff described in the tariff code, the revenue recovery for the network cost will be split between the generators and the loads from generators and half from loads. These charges will be levied by NTC to Eskom Distribution. These costs then flows through into Eskom Holdings, which then basically are detailed and approved in the IRSA tariffs. Some charges by Eskom Distribution as per the IRSA tariffs until such time that the industry wholesale tariff is implemented. Chair, that concludes this portion. I'd like to now hand over to my colleague, Mr. Keith Bowen, who will cover the trading license application.
Thank you very much, Chair. Trading of electricity via power purchase and sales agreements. Energy capacity and ancillary services are purchased power stations as well as with the independent power producers. Energy and capacity are then sold through power. This trading license application by the NTC ensures a continuation of the existing mechanism between the Eskom divisions and licensees as indicated, including the renewable generators that Eskom operates. We would also then be procuring through the IPP programs. So we've got renewable IPP program, PICA program, the risk mitigation program is entered in the next few years. We also have existing Eskom procurement programs such as the emergency generation program, which would then also be managed by the National Transmission Company. Importantly, the Section 34 process under the existing ministerial determination for Section 34 is a process currently underway to assign for these programs. Thanks. At the moment, the power sales agreements we specifically currently, when NERSA makes a revenue determination for Eskom Holdings, it covers the existing licensees within Eskom Holdings. This revenue determination is allocated to each of the Eskom Holdings in line with the information that is provided by NERSA. Tariff to distribution gives effects to this determination by NERSA, which would include then hopefully a subsidy mechanism to deal with the cross subsidies in the tariff process currently.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. Similarly, again, this Import and Export License Application Act, the application is agreements. Exports are transacted via power sales agreements, and then there's also provision to actually wheeling agreements with both cross-border. This license application basically enables the continuation of the current and possibly future import and export activities that are presently fulfilled by Eskom Holdings. In terms of our activities in the region, currently they spread through the SADC region. We are then by a Kaurabasa Treaty, as well as the Lesotho Electricity Company agreements will be in markets on a month ahead, week ahead, day ahead, and intraday basis, and these are enabled to neighboring countries through bilateral agreements. And again, there is also, as indicated, that they are enabled in terms by the transmission license, and this is as per the South African grid code. Next slide. And then in terms of the agreements that we have in place, we do have of Zambia at the moment. There are no agreements in place. All the agreements tabled here are power supply. 2 agreements which were mentioned, which is the HCB agreement, Kaurabasa, as well as the Lesotho. Next slide. In terms of the export cross-border customers should not receive cross-subsidies from South customers. And these bilateral export agreements, the pricing, it consists of recovery of energy costs as well as use of systems costs, which also relate to the customer service negotiated power purchase agreement, which is based on the avoided tariff cost mechanism, which looks into the fuel, the capital, as well as the operations, where it does become available from their own generation. Thank you. And I will now hand over to my colleague, Ragini Ramkumar, to deal with the finance aspects. Thank you.
Efficient licensee will be able to recover its full cost of license for the corresponding NTC revenue requirements that are as a result of the Eskom NYPD5 application that was recently concluded should be allocated to NTC. It is understood that further developments are still required to establish a pricing or revenue methodology which would in future apply to NTC and the energy industry. I'd like to hand back to Mr. Skeepers for the concluding slide.
Required for the operationalization of NTC, which is a wholly owned subsidiary company of Eskom, in order to operate the national transmission system, trade in electricity, and conduct.
Thank you to the Eskom team. In fact, you did pretty well. Babunda, whether is it possible for us to get copies of that presentation, or was it sent to us? Because it could be useful for the members to be able to listen when they're asking questions, if those presentations could be sent to the ELS to then ask questions, to pose questions. What do you say?
Thank you very much, Mr. Kumet, and thanks there with Mr. Skeepers. The team use what I mean for a license application now, launching an application, and therefore also be able to address the issue here that whereas there is another, we've got Eskom Holdings still holding this license in essence. Just responding to that it's an application whilst there is still also when it comes to the section 34, the to know then what that would mean. As well as I thought at this juncture there would be indicative timelines given just to give comfort that things are going to be on time, because the whole thing here is how do you synchronize things, like moving ahead smoothly, and with that is there are issues pertaining to other policy requirements are complied with in the. With this change, I was hoping that in the presentation today, I'm going to see how does this application and the unbundling and overall leave the viability one would have preferred to do differently had the applications been kind of lodged simultaneously. So I've got a question there in terms of some of it could mean detail, and I would prefer that you then provide that detail by way of written submission to us. Will you supply to from a transmission side to Eskom transmission, or you'll also be supplying to third parties? And what are the pros and cons then? If you look at the pros and cons of either way, in terms of, again, going back to the impact, not only on comes to the agreements, I was hoping that you would provide, whether positive or negative, to the agreements that are currently held by Eskom as Eskom Holdings SOC Limited. That for me. You spoke, for example, on slide 2, on slide 3, where you're standing, they raise concern as the lines of prioritizing and sequencing the skepticism around also the impact of this to the changes in the tariffs. Not if we're going to deal with it when we come to the the tariff application. As for now, we're more seized with the issue of the licensing as it stands. Thank you.
Mr. Sekgomoto, Skeppers, and Mr. Skeppers, and I think also your slides that you have engaged with the lenders and all the engagements they were concluded in 2022. But I think it's the issue of, isn't it a better process to wait for that to be concluded on by National Treasury, as you are mentioning, or before we actually continue with this? Because where I'm sitting, it's a major issue for the organization. Assets. If you can briefly talk to us about the issue of assets, looking at the current structure, sometimes the assets are intertwined with those of this. When I'm talking about, I mean, the transmission company, or methodology that you are presenting, the proposed tariff. Why are you restricting to actually only be deleted? So what is the issue with that? Because Chair is the issue of stem from, if we are doing exactly the same business that you are doing at the present moment, saying in the future you might, but currently implement some efficiencies and actually deal with all the transit currently existing staff members and no income.
Thank you, Madam Spear. At this stage, I'd like to acknowledge Mr. Chambani Pokula, who's joined us as the member of the ELS. I notice I don't see his hand up, but perhaps having joined in the middle of the presentation, he may not have specific questions. But if it does, Mr. Pokula, you've got an opportunity, sir, to ask the questions.
Thank you, Mr. Gumede, Chairperson, and apologies for being late. But yes, I joined at the beginning of the presentations. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Before I do, I see Mr. Mkiza has got a quick follow-up. Mr. Mkiza, do you want to add something that you may have forgotten? Oh, you're covered. Sorry. Okay. Apologies. With the public here, and also perhaps with us, the rationale for the change, for the rationale for the because if you can do that, then now, for instance, I've got a question linked to that. If you can share the rationale for the unbundling, or was this just done, still everything linked to that, would be, with that rationale for the unbundling, what is the envisaged stage here? Will the NTC, and sometimes it's NTC, if we can just maybe assist us with that, so we can all stick to using this the same name. But will NTC always be held by its shares being held by Eskom Holdings, or is there a view that this entity, being a separate legal entity, that it could be owned by another state-owned entity? So, or in its own, is perhaps, if we can, and it's linked again to the rationale, if we can show to ever privatize its founding documents, that this entity will ever be privatized and owned by private interest, or will it something that will always remain state? Looking through some of your published documents, I couldn't help but wonder, do you, in defining the National Transmission Company, are you going to be using the definitions that 2 and below, 132 kV and below? But in some of the lines that you are defining, and some of the are part of transmission, if you can then maybe just indicate to me, in defining NTC, are you linking NTC to the definition Act, which is above 132 kV? Again, you can correct me if I read that incorrectly. The fourth question, or the fifth question, can't have been asked by by the members of the ELS, but I'm going to ask it directly. And again, for me, it's linked to the rationale. Why would it only sell to Eskom distribution, and including all the non-discriminatory issues related to those sections of the law? That so basically what I'm then asking is that when you make reference to only selling to Eskom distribution, what is the basis for that? Last question to you is, you've made somewhere mention of, are you also applying for the transmission tariff? If so, on what basis are you? Interim arrangement that you are proposing in respect of the licensing to make sure that it is a viable entity, but you are not necessarily applying for a tariff. But if you are applying for a tariff, if you can indicate, can you maybe just kindly explain what you mean by that? Where is that drawn from? Remember, we are dealing with the Electricity Regulation Act and nothing else that has not been gazetted, been enacted. So if you can maybe just explain to us what you mean by that wholesale tariff. So that brings to the end. All right, thank you. Mr. Skeppers, as you would give us some time back, there was a saving in terms of your presentation, but also just to afford the panel, as well as the public out there who may be listening to this, an opportunity to better understand what indeed are you trying to do and why. We'll give an opportunity to respond. But remember, you've got so I'd like to hand over back to you, Mr. Skeppers, but make a choice in terms of which questions you.
Chair, thank you very much for those questions. We will answer a few of them. There may be some that we respond back to you in writing. So if I could perhaps request.
Mr. Chair, this is a question which Mr. Mokize had asked, and as I understood the question, 2023. So the first suspensive condition requires an outcome from the NERSA process to be fulfilled. And that suspensive condition is the grant by NERSA of the licenses which are being applied for. Of course, that could not have been, it is an outcome of this program we are presently busy with. In other words, both the unfulfilled suspensive conditions relate to the very process that we are in today, namely the licensing application process. If the license, the transmission license and the other licenses are granted, then the suspensive conditions will be fulfilled with that grant. If they are not, then the suspensive conditions won't be fulfilled. And it's for that reason that prior to the application having been made.
Question on the Section 34. I think part of the question relates to that some of these entities are connected at distribution level. So perhaps you could deal with those two questions, Keith. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair, Mr. Sekamoto, Mr. Skeppers, sorry. The idea of the Section 30, so even the distribution to the NTC, because that is kind of the thinking behind the methodology behind the roadmap. The roadmap does say that in time, the NTC would also be selling to other parties beyond just Eskom distribution. Idea of where we're heading to. Our principal concern in terms of selling to third parties is that we do not have a framework right now in which to establish a wholesale tariff and to ensure that that tariff plan, that once the license is awarded, we then start working on the wholesale tariff methodology to look at how we establish these prices to third parties to purchase at that level. I think we also have to bear in mind that there's also, as part of the roadmap electricity regulation amendment bill, that there is a future market single buyer model, which was the basis for the original roadmap, may no longer be appropriate into the future, and that we would be looking at the transmission entity or the NTC running a market for other players participating as a single buyer that is selling to all parties. So that is a key underlying issue for us to consider, that instead of going through the process to develop the wholesale, and so that is why at this stage we're saying, let us keep it to the Eskom distribution entity. We can either establish the wholesale tariff methodology as per the electricity pricing policy, or we now go into the market definition to allow third parties to participate in the market. I think the question was asked as to where do we come up with this idea of the wholesale tariff, and that is pricing policy, which talks about how a wholesale tariff should look and give some foundation for what that tariff should look like and the methodologies. Obviously, we know that the electricity pricing policy is also being amended, and there might be a different also impact on how we define these final the final wholesale tariff. But I think importantly, the main reason why we're saying right now we would stick to selling to Eskom distribution, our users are buying at a wholesale tariff, we are accommodated for those sort of subsidies that are in the process. So to add to that, but we can always come back.
Thank you, Keith. Appreciate it. Somebody needs to mute, and that was me. Apologies. I keep unmuting on the screen. Sorry about that. Adding BEE compliance. Chair, as we speak and being part of the Eskom group, I think we would be expected to ensure that we comply with the measure as we speak today, and that's something that we would expect to continue to happen going forward. Clearly, it's an evolving space, and there has been various engagements with DTIC, DMRE, and the IPP historical transactions, and in fact, some of the factored into the procurement program. So that is something that we are mindful of, and we would ensure that we comply and that we work to improve the score for NTC. Chair, a question then about the assets. Specifically, I think there were two questions. One being that some of the assets are intertwined with
Chair, I'm just going to briefly share a slide. Important to note that the ERA defines a transmission power system to mean a consisting of all lines and substation equipment where the nominal voltage is above 132, and it recognizes that other equipment are either part of the distribution system or class substation, typically multiple customers, users, to be able to connect to the transmission system. And these connection actively becomes a method by which it enables efficient operations, non-discriminatory access, and least cost. And Chair, it's therefore motivated in our application that the NTC needs to own and operate these transformation equipment as well as the associated connection assets. It can be noted that in the existing Eskom Holdings there's a clause which allows for the licensee to own and operate such connection assets. It is recommended that this clause be retained or included in NTC National Transmission License application or license. Thank you, Chair.
To comment on
the loans that are transmission related or relate to transmission activities have actually the actual contract for the loans in place right now that will transfer into the NTCSA. And we basically, NTCSA will be accountable to paying Eskom, and Eskom will then obviously deal with the lenders in terms of payments, etc. The lender concept is part of the assets that are linked to Eskom, and when the loans were actually made, are part of have access to if they its share via the intercompany loan. Chair, I'll hand back to you.
the name of the company. It is National Transmission A, but I think NTC is simpler. But the name of the company is National Transmission Company South Africa. I hope that clarifies, Chair. And then, Chair, if I can then respond briefly to the question, the functional separation and whether there are still outstanding issues with regard to that. That has been completed. There are no issues outstanding there. Looking ahead, and we have a workforce plan that takes into account, I think members will be aware that there is substantial. It goes with adding new transmission substations and new transmission lines that will require operators and technicians and so on. So we have a forward view of the resource requirements. And so those requirements are not, and the clarity emerges. The envisaged end state, do we envisage privatization? So, Chair, just to give this in summary, but we will also put this in writing to be comprehensive. There are a few key underlying the rationale for the restructuring. One of the key ones is around transparency. As we speak, all the costs are bundled, and we have, and preferably, this should more into the future on the fiscus, and hence the question of the independence of transmission as a system operator in particular, repeatedly from different stakeholders. And that's one of the things that we seek to clarify, that as we operate the system, we would want to give investors confidence that we are not biased interests equitably in terms of the rules. Confidence building, we hopefully can attract more generation into the future. Clearly, there may be other instruments that are needed to be put in place in terms of getting more investment into the generation sector going. On the question, Chair, of do we envisage the transmission NTC to be a subsidiary? It is creating some clarity and some element of certainty around what's expected of transmission into the future. And that's what we are seeking. There is nothing that would stop NTC to become a standalone SOC down the line. It's a complex issue. Commercially, that along the lines of privatizing NTC. As we have been consistent, we are at the stage NTC is being set up as a wholly owned subsidiary of Eskom. The potential getting the subsidiary established, that future envisages NTC being a part of government or state-owned. We have not at any point entertained or discussed options around privatization. And natural monopoly, it has to be regulated, and I suppose in the extreme, you can make a case for privatization, but that is not on the cards. Note and respond to in writing, because I think it is only also fair, just from a time management point of view, that we don't try to.
And I think maybe even if we have time, I will recognize you, Mr. Mkhize. And what I'm then saying, I recognize Mkhize will probably come with a follow-up, but you definitely, as indicated, you don't have to respond to any of these further questions. Now you can respond in writing. Even those that you responded to verbally, you can still expand. Mkhize, can I recognize you, sir?
Thanks, Chairperson, and thanks for the responses and the understanding, as well as the undertaking that they would pretend response. which I think here is going to be maybe section 17, subsection 1 in place to make it clear, for example, the issues of servitudes and way leaves, issues of these buyer agreements that is spoken about concerning section 34 and the question related thereto. And also in responding, it will also help to indicate short-term, medium-term, and long-term. Due recognition of the fact that the long-term is would also be somehow unclear, but to be able to provide the foresight, which I think is also going to deal with the issues that pertain to as the noting that there's been an outcry regarding distribution, because you look at that. So if you can just please assist with that in your response so that generation and transmission going forward. Thank you for that.
Thank you for Mr. Mkiza for those in your written responses. If you can make a decision on these applications going forward. With that, thank you. Like to thank and the other presenters for bearing with us. We do understand that a whole lot more time than you all the other presenters will get, but that all of us get an understanding of what exactly that's being applied to Eskom. Thank you to the Eskom team for the presentation. We'll now move to the next. We're taking the next presentation from OUTA, Ms. Liz McDade. If you could show your face. Thank you, Liz. Can I firstly ask you, do you object to taking an oath?
Don't object.
Thank you. In that case, kindly raise your right hand and affirm the following. Do you solemnly declare that the evidence and the information that you are going to give to this panel is the truth and the whole truth as you know it? Thank you. In that case, kindly state your name, the organization you are representing today, and your designation therein, please.
The organization Undoing Tax Abuse, and I am a parliament.
Maybe posed by members to you. And yeah, I'm assuming you're making a formal power.
Okay, great.
All right. With that, with that, then I'll give you
all three applications. Who is OUTA for the ensure that government and those entities that serve us should be held accountable, and to ensure that our money is spent properly. And so we really, I think South African energy history, I would say, is to move to there. And we are very, as active citizens, you don't ever advertise and nobody comes to present. So we application. So and I'm just highlighting this because we are stuck in a load shedding day-to-day crisis. Energy that our consumers in the future also have a sustainable energy system. And then this is, I think it's probably the first time I've said I've support something. Normally we're fighting against what Eskom is doing now and what we have seen over the last couple of years in general, supportive of the restructuring. We're not in support of privatization, but changing. And a couple of, so on the right-hand side, all those little bubbles are just showing from the blue in 2020 to 2020, therefore it's just an indication of 90% renewables by 2040. The idea that this is the way the world is going. So a big country like they are suggesting I've got a 20 gigawatt, as much we can do, but if the system doesn't work, then we are going to get blocked and hit a number of speed bumps. So for us, one of the speed bumps that we've been facing is the independent systems operator and transmission system. So this is why we say this is a good thing. Not dwell too much, but there's a number of references in that slide which I've sent to, which you could look at. So now, concerned about is how is this thing going to, and the members have raised these issues as well, how is this thing going to work from a cost perspective? So I was just looking at different tariffs and poking around with numbers. And for example, this is just out of Eskom's charges currently, and I just look at the land rate because rural background, and so this, which I'm assuming that these would be linked up with the system operator and in the transmission part of things. Of course, we don't know because that bit was hidden from in the US that just worked out a kind of calculator. Was if you're in a forest, it takes you 2.25 times, amount of money to try and figure out how it. Just to sort of try and understand what are we going to be made up, the generation, transmission, distribution. So transmission is now like 3%. I was looking at NYPD5. So now is that sufficient? And how will this work? So I know members have raised this, and I think Eskom is if we're going to unbundle, then we need to know what does it mean from a financial implications. So the other thing is, if we look at the JET-P finance, of the electricity finance, I have to admit I didn't put the for transmission upgrading. So how will that work? Is that money going to Eskom Holdings? Is it going to go to the NTC? It's difficult to comment if you can't actually see what you're commenting on. And then a question is, what we've seen in Eskom is that Eskom, and each time we pay, it covers its own costs and obviously makes something so that it can invest to ensure that it's we're moving to the digital age. There's got to be a lot more to be upgraded. So I can imagine it's going to be quite an expensive operation. We need to have transparency. And as with Eskom generally at the moment, we've just got money going in and out. And it would make sense to me if it was not a profit-driven entity needed. And I guess what I didn't really see, again, this comes into maybe more of the discussion around tariffs. It's just thoughts, and we need to have some out-the-box thinking, in my view, and some innovation as we move forward into the system. So some of the questions the members have raised, but I do feel that NERSA has this one in their hands, as it were. And so from our view as civil society, those are possibly some of my suggestions, reflections. Thank you very much.
As you said, it was going to be a short and sweet presentation, 10 minutes. Thank you. I appreciate that. Now, if I can just invite the members, questions, comments, presentation for us, a show of hands, members. Whilst members are thinking, I do want to say, firstly, just to express my own appreciation for the support that you are giving to this application. It is very, as you said, you're supporting restructuring, but not privatization. That's also noted. Questions that they may be able to respond to directly, they will be able to. But others, of course, they will come in writing. And when we then consider the application, you will then see the responses that they provided. But I see Mr. Mkiza's hand is up.
Thanks, Chairperson. I don't necessarily have a specific questions to Madam McDade. To thank her for making this presentation, as it helps, to get feedback from the public, because this is the whole purpose of consultation. Comments further after this, but particularly when one considers that he's indicated that she's supportive of the restructuring and not privatization, and maybe then it's got other unintended consequences within a generation level, both within Eskom as a company, as well as with that segment overall countrywide, because we are not regulating just Eskom, but regulating the industry. I'll leave it at that, Chairperson. Thank you.
Kiza, I think before you respond, if you're gonna maybe give us any closing remarks, I do want to also indicate that I'm by Eskom. If there's any additional comments that.
Is a very valid one, and I don't think we kind of have thought it through properly yet. And I've been looking internationally, and it seems that these are questions that are being grappled with will later success. So systems operator, and then there are other, they should be targeted as the first port of call when looking for the whole idea of reskilling and not letting people, in terms of ensuring that we keep parts of Eskom that work and allow people. But thank you. I think that's all I'd say. Is I wish you well in your deliberations, and if, as I said, if there's anything else that comes to mind, I'll certainly forward to you.
Thank you, Madam, and thank you also for the. I think a lot for the support, and also just for playing the role of what the civil service should do. That is, if you've got an opportunity to present, please present. It's like voting. If you've got an opportunity to vote, go and vote. It's your right. Thank you.
If you don't use it, it will lose it. So we'll definitely be here.
Correct. Thank you, Ms. McKnight.
Thank you.
On behalf of NERSA, thank you. Right. See you, sir. I'd really appreciate that. Show your face so we can swear you in. I'm assuming if we can please just indicate, switch on your camera and switch on your personally. If not, we can always come back to him. So, we just see signing up. No, it's not. If not, can we then move on to the next presenter, Ms. Lydia from Community Faith, a Community Faith leader. I know it's a bit early. I'm really hoping that to her. Are you available, Ms. Peterson?
Sorry, this is Wayne Duplessis here from SAFC. Lydia is struggling to connect, but she's trying to connect now.
All right. I assume that you're not mandated to make a presentation. Okay. Maybe whilst she's still struggling, therefore, can we then move over to your presentation? We can swear you in.
1 second, just trying to get the camera on. There we go. Hello.
Yes, I can see you. Do you object to taking an oath?
No, I do not.
In that case, can you kindly raise your right hand and affirm the following? Do you so?
My name is Wayne Duplessis. I represent the Southern Africa.
PowerPoint presentation, or is it an oral presentation? Access rights?
I'm just double checking. Just give me 1 second. No, not yet.
Right. Mr. Mabunda, if you can assist, please.
Chair, no restrictions from my side. Perhaps if you're struggling, you can forward the presentation.
All right, you can just put it on 15 minutes. And I see Lydia is joining. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you very much, Chair, and others. My name is Wayne Duplessis, as I said earlier, from SAFC, the Southern African Faith Communities Environment Institute. And this is my presentation today. Just, Chairperson, could you confirm that it's moved to the next slide? Sorry, I should make sure.
You can. In fact, you can still just drive it by a page down. It should still be fine.
I think it's working now. Great. So we just about.
We can't see. Put it back up.
Okay. Right. Can I speak to it in that way? Is that okay?
It's fine. It's okay. It's okay.
It's okay.
Please proceed. Yeah. Please proceed.
Thank you. So just about SAFC, the Southern African Communities Environment Institute. It's a multi-faith organization, and we are committed to supporting faith leaders and the communities in Southern Africa to increase awareness, understanding, and action on eco-justice, sustainable living, and climate change. We work with our faith leaders to create a strong, resilient regional network of them and communities who are challenging governments on poor energy decision-making and holding executives account when planning lacks transparency and legitimacy and fails in the transition towards clean and affordable energy systems. So, in terms of the National Transmission Company licensing granting that we're speaking about today, SAFC supports the principle of an independent NTC with the provisos that the NTC is wholly owned by the state, that a separate NTC will remove red tape and open opportunities to purchase power from the wider range of electricity producers to help alleviate the current electricity crisis which is plaguing South Africa at the moment. And that NERSA clarifies the implications for electricity tariffs and informs the public of these prior to granting the operating license. I think this is a key point going forward. Finally, we also with the proviso that the cost of an unbundled Eskom does not add to the increased cost of electricity, but instead result in the reduced tariffs through access to cheaper generation options. This is one of our biggest concerns, is that by splitting the Eskom, unbundling Eskom into 3 different entities, that the price of electricity will increase directly to the public. SAFC supports that the entity would include the improved opportunity to fast track and grow much needed renewable energy generation by removing the monopoly of having to purchase all of our electricity from Eskom only, to diversify the investors and investment in the new renewable energy generation, and also with the lifting of some of the restrictions around private generation, as well as permission for local authorities to buy directly from independent power producers. An independent NTC is needed so transmission can be better match supply with demand, as we see that we need right now. An NTC also that offers opportunity for improved transparency around cost of supply, as well as the issues around the state of the grid, and hopefully can improve both of those. So SAFC believes that the benefits of an independent national transmission company, the NTC, include that private finance is likely to look more favorably at working with an independent NTC regarding future investment in energy generation. This is apparently very interesting when looking at the loan that Eskom is able to access right now. And in reliable sources from within the Presidential Climate Commission have indicated that the majority of the $5.7 billion promised to Africa during COP26 has been earmarked to upgrade the transmission grid. So therefore, it feels essential that these funds are invested in the NTC for grid expansion or upgrades and not lost in the Eskom parent company itself. However, so in spite of all the positives that we can see of the NTC, SAFC has concerns regarding the impact of the cost of supply of electricity and therefore on affordability of future electricity tariffs. We do not know what the impact is likely to be regarding tariffs, and as I said, this has to be made clear before the license is granted. And this means that SAFC can't give an unconditional go-ahead from our side, from our point of view, for the licensing of the NTC. We need NERSA to provide clarity amongst the cost implications for the public, so that the public can fully make informed comment. And this is to happen prior to the license application. Will there be an additional costs in setting up 3 entities with 3 different boards and 3 different ways of working? Secondly, the cost of electricity to the end user, as I said, is crucial and critical. Access to energy is directly linked to achieving a just energy transition. And as SAFC's membership includes many grassroots faith communities and faith leaders struggling already with energy poverty, this kind of affordability is obviously one of the chief concerns that we have around this license application. So just in summary, SAFC does support the granting of the transmission license, the electricity trading license, electricity import and export license to the NTC on condition that the NTC and the transmission grid remains wholly a state asset. And then finally, as I said, NERSA clarifies who the NTC may purchase electricity from. That is, will the NTC be licensed to purchase from IPPs and other organizations such as mines or industry who have a surplus to sell? And again, what impact does this have on our electricity prices? Thirdly, that NERSA explains how the operation of the NTC will impact tariffs, approving of the licenses. There should be a recognition by NERSA and by the Eskom board that the unbundling of Eskom and the licensing of the NTC needs to support the just energy transition in assuring affordable access to energy for all South Africans. And then finally, recognition by various role players such as NERSA, National Treasury, COPTA, and SALGA, that the restructuring of our energy supply system should create a new tariff methodology as well as a sustainable system to provide basic energy allocation to low-income households. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you so very much on 2 fronts for filling in quickly for both the presenters before you, but also for keeping well within your time of 15 minutes. We really appreciate that. And in fact, it will come in handy later because we there was a key stakeholder that was left, and I was surprised why they're not presenting today. But there's a key stakeholder that had been left out who needs to be accommodated. I will talk to that later. But thank you for the presentation. Members, you have the presentation by SFC for you. Mr. du Plessis gave us time. If you can just maybe engage with the presentation, please, by show of hands, if you've got any questions for him. Again, Mr. du Plessis, whilst the members are thinking, maybe can I just pose one question to you? Before I do, let me just then recognize one. My members have now formulated their questions for you. So let's start with Mr. Pukula. Mr. Pukula, you can go in first.
Thank you, Chairperson. Mr. Wayne, may you just expand on your concern around the costs that will increase when a new transmission company is formed, and whether you're saying that they shouldn't, or you're accepting that there would be an increase in cost, but maybe it should be kept at a certain level. May you just expand on that? Thank you.
Short and concise. Thank you, Mr. Pukula. Mr. Mkiza?
Thank you very much, and thank Mr. du Plessis for the presentation. Because the slide has been taken down, I'm not so sure whether I'm going to read the words accordingly. But there's a space where you were saying that we expect NERSA to then talk to the impact on the tariff prior to issuing a license, if it should be issued. I'd just like to know what your expectation with regard to that, because after the license has been issued, there will then be a consideration of the tariff, which will then talk to the details related thereto. Just want to get an understanding as to what your expectations are with regard to that, noting the stage that you are at now. Thank you.
Thank you again, Mr. Mkiza. Short and concise. Any inputs from members? No. One question for me, Mr. du Plessis. The other question the members have asked, I was going to also ask about your view on the tariffs, but maybe I may just expand a little bit on that. But the question that I wanted to ask you is, do you consider that this application creates an independent transmission company? From what you were saying, I mean, I saw your emphasis on independence. Do you, in your opinion, believe that the application that sits before us fulfills that requirement of that independence? If not, what do you suggest can be done to improve it, to improve the independence? I think maybe just to feed off the questions from Mr. Mkize, and I guess also slightly from Mr. Pukula, the question I wanted to, in terms of tariffs, because as you know, this current application is for the license, or is for those licenses. Mm-hmm. And ordinarily, in terms of the Act, we may need to just have a general description of the tariff methodology that may be used in the future. But are you then saying that until the process on clarity on the tariff methodology and the tariffing, until NERSA has clarified that in terms of the approach on tariffing, that do you believe that NERSA should not make a decision on licensing? So those are the questions, Mr. Plessis, to you.
Thank you, Chair. Just checking you can hear me still.
Loud and clear.
Thank you, Chair. Okay, great. I'm going to go to Mr. Makula first. Thank you very much, Mr. Makula, for your question. I think while we do understand that there could be cost in the creation of a new company, Mr. Makula, I think what SAFC is saying is that the openness in the cost and really the transparency to the public in knowing how that will affect our day-to-day lives and how it will affect the lives of ordinary people is what we are really saying. So while we believe that there's going to be cost associated with a new company, and that maybe that shouldn't be curbed, because, in the economies of scale, we can't always curb these things, but we need to have openness, because unfortunately what has happened is a lot of mistrust around the costing, because, people see increases every year in terms of cost, electricity costs. So what I would like is just or what SAFSI would like rather, is the openness around the cost itself, and how would the split into these three different entities, how would that affect the cost? Ideally, and this might be wishful thinking, the cost might be able to come down because we'll be more competitive and we'll be allowed to access different streams of funding, which won't be affected by the whole of Eskom. Transmission, which is, for example, in a good space, could access funding and thereby bring the cost down on their side. Generation might be able to access other funding and bring the cost down on their side. So that is the answer to your question, sir. Mr. Mkhize, I think the impact of the tariff, again, is sort of the same answer that I gave Mr. Bakula. I think what SAFSI calls for is the openness around what that would be. And again, we understand that this is the first part of the process. The licensing is the first part of the process. And then we talk about that. But I just really hope that that part of the conversation, the costing and what it really means to real South Africans on the ground, will be an open conversation. And in all honesty, sir, one that is better advertised than this one was, because we want as many people as we can to engage in what it would mean to them and really be engaged in their energy future going forward. Chair, just in terms of your question as well, do I consider that the application creates good independence around Eskom? I mean, I think that is a yes. I think it does, because by splitting them into different entities, we really will not only make sure they're independent, but hopefully there'll be an increased point of transparency within the company, because at the moment with Eskom, it's a large entity, and there's many veils in between a lot of different things. Hopefully, by splitting them into three entities, transparency will be increased, as well as I said earlier, costing, which is affected down to the public, will be increased. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so very, very much for your input. If there are no further questions from members, again, we'd like to extend to you, Mr. du Plessis. You've also listened to the Eskom presentation, and you may have made notes, and they may have clarified certain things to you that may not have been clear before you made the presentation today, that perhaps you may want to expand on. I will give you 7 days from today to then perhaps maybe add any additional input that you may want to add.
Thank you, Chair. That's good.
Thank you. All right, thank you. And we'd now like to recognize Ms. Lida Peterson, and we do recognize that you had some challenges connecting earlier, but we really appreciate your continued participation in our processes. We'd like to welcome you. Can I maybe just get an understanding? Would you object to taking an oath?
No, not at all, Chairperson.
Thank you. In that case, kindly raise your right hand and affirm the following. Do you solemnly declare that the evidence you are going to give to this panel is the truth and the whole truth?
It is so.
Thank you. For the record, please state your name, the organization that you are representing today, and your designation in it, please.
My name is Lydia Peterson. I'm a faith leader in Mitchells Plain, Cape Town, and I work as well with SAFSI and other organizations as an energy activist within our communities.
Thank you so very much. Are you making a PowerPoint presentation, or is it a verbal input?
No, sir. It is just, yes, it's just an oral submission. Could I possibly switch off the camera to save with bandwidth?
Yes, you can, and I will assist as well. I'll switch off mine. You've got 15 minutes, madam, if you can go ahead, please.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
Okay, as I've said, I am working in the Mitchells Plain area and other areas as well. And as an energy activist, I'm constantly in contact with our communities. And when the first thought came up about the license that is sought by for the transmissions company, not many very people know about it and what does it mean. So there are concerns that the consumers, especially those that are living in impoverished areas, will bear the brunt of this, as I explained already, that they do not really know what it is happening. So what they do need is a stable energy supply and basically living proof of energy poverty as well as affordability where energy is concerned. For years, the consumer are battered and bruised by high costs of living, high food prices, and exorbitant electricity price increases. Will the establishment of a new transmission company mitigate these, or will it simply increase the uncertainty of costs and energy supply? I took particularly note of the climate finance pledged at COP26 in Glasgow, which is earmarked for a just transition in this country, with the emphasis on just, meaning inclusivity for all in terms of energy justice. This finance should be wholly for that intended purpose and not to be used to finance anything, including a transmission company or the unbundling of Eskom, as we have heard so many times that's in the process. My question is, who will fund this? How will future costs of electricity be determined? Furthermore, it is of importance that consumers not be further burdened by the makings of government decisions that are not of benefit to them. This move could be seen as a step to privatization of the state-owned entity by way of unbundling Eskom. So, however we come to the proposed license, could that mean that renewable energy technologies could be fast-tracked and offer the consumer the benefit of least cost pricing for their purchases? This could also mean that energy poverty in marginalized communities will be eradicated and energy supply ensured. The possibilities are that even communities could be power producers, making them pioneer participants of a just transition. However good this sounds in principle, the concerns remain. How will the public know how costs will be incorporated? Who will be responsible for informing the public? Surely NERSA could and should step in and be in an oversight role as per their mandate to regulate pricing. It is also of utmost importance, sir, that the proposed license for the National Transmission Company follow transparent procedural steps to include communities that would be affected by issuing of such a license. The oversight and accountability is key in moving forward. That comes to my end of my presentation. I just would like to add that being in favor of a transmission, because I have now started looking at the generation, the transmission, as well as the distribution. The question that came up is how will costs then be considered and incorporated in that way? Will it be a wholly entity where they're going to do like a blanket increase? Because that was the question that was put to me and which I cannot answer. So from this, we do support, because we do have to have transmission lines in order for the communities to receive those energy supplies and let it be at a cost and a price that they can afford. I thank you, the panel and the chairperson, for this opportunity. And I might add that it is wonderful to be here again. Thank you so very much.
Thank you so very much, Ms. Peterson, and for your input, concise, direct. And yes, I'm hoping that Eskom at the end would be able to assist with some of the responses and in clarifying some of the questions you may have asked, so that the further processes at NERSA would also assist with that clarification. However, can I just open it, to the members if you've got any questions for Ms. Peterson? Comments, perhaps? Show of hands, members. Again, whilst my members are still thinking, Ms. Peterson, I've got two questions for you. Firstly, the first one is, you were indicating the concern around funding, for instance, in terms of the just energy transition, that your concern is that we're hoping that some of that money should go to where it is meant to go. But for instance, in terms of transmission, wouldn't you consider that investing in transmission capacity to be able to tie in sources of energy from places that traditionally perhaps didn't have much capacity in terms of transmission, and therefore perhaps limiting their connectivity onto the system and the bringing to the market? would you not consider that if some of that money in terms of just energy transmission were invested, the just energy transition, if that money was, some of that money was diverted or rather was used to increasing the capacity of the network, would you not see that as that money being well used? So that is the first question. The second question, which is one that touches, and your plea, I ever since I joined NERSA, it's really been my biggest plea that for us to be able to have a greater reach on the users of electricity. We engage a lot with the producers or with the supply industry, but the demand sector, the users of the energy that is produced, we seem to have very limited contact with. What would you suggest NERSA would need to do to improve the participation by consumers in our processes, so that also they will have a greater understanding of what's at play, to even have a greater understanding of these changes, what the implication of these changes to them would be, to even pose questions that may even assist with the process. What could NERSA do? So those are my two questions, Ms. Peterson. I'm not sure my members still don't see a hand from them, but if you can then respond to those two, please. Thanks.
Okay, let me tackle your second question. I think since I have been an energy activist and a community worker, I have never seen NERSA come out to the communities. I've never seen that. And as I have been following NERSA, it is part of, I would say, my mandate to keep up to date. I've never seen actual interaction from NERSA saying, oh, we're going on a roadshow to Khayelitsha. I've never seen that. I may be corrected on that. But to further substantiate your question is that I think you being the regulator, sir, and having that mandate where pricing is concerned, you can correct me if I'm wrong. I think that better communication and visibility in the sectors where you are so sorely needed. I think more visibility and interaction with communities so that there can be a proper understanding as to where does the regulation come in as to hike the prices or to give Eskom what they deserve or what they need and things like that. That would be the second response to your question. As the first one, as to should I feel that the money should be used for the transmission company, I think that the transmission company and the three separate entities came way back before COP26. The unbundling and the three separate entities were in the makings and discussions before COP26. So when we're talking about climate finance, or in my view, when we're talking about climate finance, it should be just for that, not to do a reverse on that and fund a transmission company, which is still a state-owned entity. It's supposed to be like that. So I would say that in my opinion and in my view, allow that climate finance to be for the just transition where it is so surely needed, where it doesn't leave anybody behind, and focus some other funding for the transmission company. Thank you, sir.
Thank you so very much, Ms. Peterson, and thank you again for the continued support of our processes. On behalf of NERSA, I'd like to say we are noting your connection challenges earlier. I guess it also talks to the concern around participation by consumers. But nonetheless, your points you've raised are noted, and we will improve with time. Just nudge us forward. Slowly, we will get there.
Mr. Kumeri.
Yes.
Mr. Kumeri, I've been nudging for, I think, 7 years already.
Unfortunately, this vehicle is very slow and it's a big ship, so it's gonna take a long time for it to change. But you just don't lose faith in us. Just keep nudging us forward. We will definitely change.
Definitely, yes. I've been nudging and for 7 years already, and at this very moment, I can promise you, I'm not going to stop nudging. I want complete visibility for community's sake. For them to say that when they switch on that electricity in that house. I know exactly what I'm going to pay. I know exactly where it comes from, and not talk to them out of my view as to unbundling and a new company. Whereas if I'm just mention Eskom, then everybody's in a tiz. So the visibility of NERSA, it is important because you are the person or the entity that would regulate and that they will understand what is happening. I'll be back next year. I promise I'll be back.
Thank you. Hopefully we'll actually come back before. Yeah, we'll come back before that. With that, we'd like to thank you, Ms. Peterson, for a presentation. Members, there was an oversight. There was a key stakeholder. By the way, I've not forgotten about Mr. Mphahlele. And if he is around, if he has joined, we would like to give him an opportunity for him to make a presentation. However, and I'll be guided by you, Mr. Mabunda. However, there was a key stakeholder that we forgot. For some reason, was left out of the program. SALGA. They are available for the presentation, members. We may not have indicated upfront that they are part of the presenters. I was actually surprised when I didn't see their name in terms of the list of presenters, but Mr. Nhlanhla is available. So, but can I then firstly understand Mr. Mabunda before I invite Mr. Nhlanhla? Can I understand if Mr. Mphahlele has finally managed to join us? So we give him an opportunity.
Even at the beginning, Mr. Mphahlele was with us, perhaps struggling with connectivity to unmute so that he can present, and we are struggling to get hold of him on the phone, but we have not given up on him. So in the meantime, I suggest that we proceed with Mr. Ngidi.
Thank you so very much. All right, now that's the issue of technology, I'm afraid, and the question is always that it raises is whether any of our processing are leading to exclusions. But yeah, we need to be able to improve with time and find ways of making it easier for any of our stakeholders to be able to join a platform of this one. All right, with that, I'd like to then invite Mr. Nhlanhla. I saw you, if you can come on screen again, sir. Thank you so very much. I must admit, as indicated, I was surprised that SALGA was not participating in this event, but thank you for rectifying that. But as a start, would you object to taking an oath?
Good afternoon, Chair and members. No, I would not object, sir.
Thank you. In that case, can you kindly raise your right hand and affirm the following? Do you solemnly declare that the evidence and the information that you are going to give to this panel is the truth and the whole truth as far as you know it?
I do, Chair.
Thank you. For the record, kindly state your name, the organization that you are representing today, and your designation in it, please.
Thank you, Chair. My name is Nhlanhla Ngidi. I'm Head of Energy and Electricity Distribution in SALGA.
Thank you. As you are very familiar with our processes, we will afford you 15 minutes for your presentation, and then, of course, a further 10 minutes to answer questions that may have been posed by members. So I assume that you are making a formal presentation?
Yes, Chairperson. I will try to. Please let me know if you can see it.
Yes, I can see it. It's clear, and we can clearly hear you as well. So you've got 15 minutes, if you can proceed. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. And first, just to appreciate for slotting us in. I'm not sure what would have happened in the registration process. We did submit the form. Unfortunately, maybe it might have fallen through the cracks. But yes, definitely as SALGA, a very affected member or affected stakeholder to this process through our members' municipalities. So today we have submitted the comments from the local government perspective. So what we're going to present today is mostly the issues that are at a macro level that we want to raise with the regulator and maybe with Eskom around the issue of the restructuring and unbundling that is taking place within Eskom. So basically, we are very happy that, for a while now, we've been talking about reforms and changes and unbundling of Eskom. And we can see that it's currently, it's finally going to take place. But obviously, as SALCA, the key stakeholder to Eskom, we want to just raise some of those issues that might have been a blind spot or things that might need to be considered going into the future in consideration of this license application. So, Chairperson, I think also, what is good is that some of the regulator members have asked some of the questions that are some of our concerns as local government. So I will not overemphasize on some of these issues, or I will just extend where I need to. Chairperson, is my presentation moving, my slides?
Shomuka, you may want to put it on a slideshow mode and then drive it from there. But if it's easier to drive it this way, you can continue. But slideshow might be better. Thank you. You can try moving on. Yeah, but it's fine. Please continue.
Okay, so I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the background because we all know why we're here. So I'm going to move to the next slide about the transmission, the Eskom transmission license application. I know that there are 3 licenses, but I think from the SALCA point of view and municipality point of view, we want to focus more on the transmission part of things. So obviously, this is a critical part to the envisaged reforms within the whole value chain of the South African electricity supply industry, and that includes municipalities as well. And I'm sure you are aware, Chairperson, that NESA has, I think, licensed quite a few municipalities to operate the transmission lines and buying bulk from Eskom, but still not paying at. I think that there's an error there. They are not buying at a transmission level at this point, as much as in terms of the voltage levels that they are operating in that infrastructure. They are well over 200 kV, which in terms of the demarcation of assets that we did way back under the EDI reform project, if you are over 132 kV, you are basically operating a transmission infrastructure. So obviously there are several cost benefits to connecting and buying electricity at transmission level versus buying at distribution level, including also the lower connection cost charges, and also there's lower losses, higher efficiencies at transmission, especially since the South African Grid Code forces or requests that the transmission system is built at N-1 and N-2. So anyone who connects at this level obviously has confidence over the reliability of supply. So with this application, Eskom seeks to only supply Eskom distribution at transmission level. And I was listening very attentively to Eskom when they were responding to the question from Ms. Bia about why is this not involving other role players? Why is the buying of electricity at transmission level, for now, it's only going to be involving Eskom? So I listened to the response, and the response was basically saying, we are implementing a roadmap, which means we are going through a process, and we might or might not reach that point where now we're involving everyone. So I think part of the concerns for us here is, and I'm going to talk to that in the next slides, Chairperson, is, we are currently doing an unbundling. It's a form of reform. And this form of reform is going to affect what happens at distribution. And it affects fair and unfair competition at distribution. So from us as SALCA, we think that the unbundling that is taking place must be carefully considered and looked at in order for it to fit perfectly without any flaws with the restructuring that will come later at a distribution level. because we don't want to see ourselves here again now commenting about another transmission license that needs to be amended because it has to start selling to municipalities. Why don't we consider this now? Unfortunately, we don't have a roadmap that goes beyond just ESCOM and includes municipalities. It just ends at ESCOM, and that is also a great concern for us, Chairperson. We've been raising this to you and the members in our presentations, that we really need as a country to have a policy pronouncement about the whole ESI or the whole electricity supply industry, and we have a roadmap that deals with the phases of that restructuring. Right now, we understand that the ESCOM unbundling is a phase of the entire ESI restructuring, but it's a phase that will end in the middle and not really take us to the end state. So this is a concern, and it's something that we've been talking to quite immensely in our presentations. And the first bullet is actually talking to exactly what I was saying. We really need to have that country roadmap that talks to all the phases. If ESCOM unbundling is the first phase, let it be. But we have to talk about what is the second phase. Okay, the second phase maybe is distribution of ESCOM, and maybe separating wires and retail business at the ESCOM level. Maybe that's a second phase. But third phase, what happens at municipalities? So, because I think the concern is we are looking or seeing a reform taking place, and there's some kind of very subtle expectation that municipalities will be a plug and play. And that's not the issue. I think we need to really look at this carefully. So if there was a policy position or roadmap, we will be very comfortable that this is actually, moving towards executing a roadmap which has an end state as a country. All of us know each and every phase of that, roadmap, what it seeks to do and what's the end state and what is the overall structure that we're working towards. At this point in time, we really don't have a clear picture of it, and it's really concerning because any reform that is happening under the ESCOM unbundling will assume municipalities being a black box that will actually just plug in when ESCOM is done with the unbundling. So we really want to raise that red flag, Chairperson. So under the reforms that are prevailing, SALCA is of the position and view that we need to have municipalities that are connected and build at ESCOM transmission level. Also, we envision, Chairperson, this will tell you that we really need to have a roadmap, because at distribution level, there's a lot of things that we also need to deal with. One, when municipalities are preparing themselves to buy at the transmission level, there is a huge issue at distribution where some municipalities have about 50 or 60 bulk supply points from ESCOM and 60 accounts, and that's just one municipality. So that's actually some form of reform that needs to take place.
Hello? Yeah, I can hear you.
I'm sorry, there is somebody whose mic is on. Kindly switch your mics off, please. Thank you. You can proceed, Shomuk.
Thank you, Chairperson. So we look at, we envision also a future where ESCOM distribution has consolidated the current existing multiple bulk supply points into fewer accounts and fewer bulk supply points, so that when we get to a stage where municipalities now are a customer or they are buying from the NTC at transmission tariffs, we don't have a case where we have ESCOM distribution having a 6.6 kV, bulk supply point at a municipal level. We don't want to see that, and it's rather very costly for municipalities. I can make example about City Power and Ekurhuleni with the point that I'm making. They have quite a number of bulk supply points, and Chair, it's really unnecessary. Yes, it's benefiting ESCOM greatly, but I don't think it's fair. We need to look at that as some kind of a reform that needs to take place. So basically, also we're saying once all distributors, including ESCOM distribution and municipalities, are connected and build a transmission, that is where we're going to start to see a level playing field. And also this will allow transparency in terms of hidden costs in the Eskom value chain, whereby losses are absorbed by the Eskom internal structures. And that obviously has been an advantage for Eskom for quite a while, especially Eskom distribution. So this is emphasizing the issue that, a restructured ESI where not only Eskom, but also municipalities must benefit from transmission prices is a first step to ensuring a sustainable and equitable industry. So, this is what, this could not be what we envisage as the last stage or the end stage. But I think what we're trying to do now is very much what you can see in this diagram, Chairperson, because now we want to create this ISMO, but there's a question whether or not it's still independent of Eskom. Obviously, we want to move towards having a market, so it's going to take a bit of time to do that, unless we want really, private generation to eat Eskom generation for lunch. I don't think you're going to have a market very soon, but I think it's a good step that we are moving towards. Then obviously, after this stage, you can look at a phase where now you are separating retail from the wires business at the distribution level of this drone. But we see municipalities also, you can see that arrow from the TSO, that municipalities together with Eskom equitably buy from the transmission company. And obviously you would ask, Chairperson, there are municipalities that they connect at voltage levels that is below 132 in accordance with this, demarcation of assets. And yes, there's a bulk of those. But when we say the municipalities that are directly or indirectly connected to the transmission system need to get the benefits of transmission charges or transmission price, Eskom distribution can still play a role of facilitating the transportation of or wheeling of that power to the municipal distributors from the transmission system operators. So obviously here you see the change in the business model of Eskom, where now Eskom will be basically a grid operator which signs wheeling agreements with municipalities, and municipalities find themselves benefiting from directly buying at transmission level. So, Chair, I'm not going to go through this in detail because, one, I'm not a lawyer, but it's very straightforward. It's clause in the Competition Act that are highlighting, the unfairness of, horizontal and vertical relationship, and Eskom is actually part of those. And Eskom, all Eskom Eskom business units have a substantial shareholder, which is common, which is the Minister of Enterprises. So basically, this clause from the Competition Act is trying to, explain how, prohibited is unfair competition that is caused by vertical and horizontal relationships within the business. So I'm not going to go through that, but I think it's there in the Competition Act. You can just have a look at it and maybe try to unpack it in the context of how Eskom looks like now. Obviously, we're saying it's going to be a national transmission company, but the shareholder will still be government. And right now, it's still pointing towards the Minister of Enterprises. So we will still have Eskom generation and distribution and NTC, reporting to the Minister of Public Enterprises as a shareholder. So this also continues to explain what I was talking about under the Competition Act. So we're saying for Eskom transmission to limit supply to Eskom distribution only, and the exclusion of other distributors is clearly an anti-competitive behavior and is prohibited by the Competition Act. And also, I'm going to read this one. Chairperson is going to forgive me. If Eskom is a single economic entity and any prices which excludes Eskom distribution competitors, such as municipalities, is an anti-competitive behavior, especially since Eskom distribution buy directly at transmission tariffs, whereas the majority of municipalities buy at a higher distribution tariff. So under this scenario, the municipal customers are also disadvantaged because remember, the business model right now is we are sellers of municipalities. If we buy those high distribution tariffs, it means we have to pass through that tariff to the customer. And the customer obviously will be disadvantaged. So I'm going to make you an example, Chairperson, of what I was talking about. Horizontal relationships, pick and pay, checkers. Yes, Chair?
Mr. Ngiti, sorry to step you. You've got 5 more minutes, if you don't mind.
Well, more than enough, Chairperson. Thank you. So I wanted to make an example about horizontal relationships, pick and pay, checkers, and others. They all compete at the same level. There's equity here, no unfair competition. And then vertical relationship, I've already talked to the Eskom vertical relationship. And obviously, access to the national transmission grid, there's 2 parts. There's buying of electricity, and here there should be an NTC tariff, and all distributors should be able to purchase at it. And this must go through, the MFMA consultation process. Also, there's the second one is accessing the network. This could also be done directly or indirectly to the transmission, connected to the transmission system. And those directly connected can purchase from the NTC directly, obviously. Those indirectly connected, which are embedded in the distribution system because of their voltage levels, can wheel through the Eskom distribution business units network to access the purchasing of power at transmission level. In essence, all distributors should be customers of the NTC, including Eskom distribution, which would further play only just wheeling role and not the direct service provider of distributors. So going forward is my last slide, Chairperson. We're not against the reform that is taking place, but we want you to be considerate of what we are raising, because we don't want, when we build the puzzle, when we're supposed to put them together, they are not fitting in size, because we did an unbundling and reform in isolation of thinking about the whole value chain. So I think this is not NESA's role only, but obviously NESA is very close to the DMRE. We need NESA to seriously engage DMRE to come out with policy pronouncements on the restructuring of the whole ESI. And with that policy pronunciation, we want a roadmap for the whole ESI so that we understand what's going on, the steps that we are in, and why we are doing that, and how does the first step link to the second step, and so on and so forth. So we need to have this reform roadmap, obviously, in order to prevent continued unfair dispensation, which might continue in the future reform industry if we continue to do it like that. I already talked about the puzzles. Our reform is like a puzzle, because we have a value chain in the ESI, and this value chain has different stakeholders which are shaped in different manners, and within the restructuring, they also need to be reformed in a certain way in order for them to plug in on the first phases of the reform. So if these puzzles are not equal or not fitting to each other, then we have a problem, Chairperson. We already said that Eskom should be a supplier of all distributors, and Eskom will facilitate and will to municipalities, even those that are connecting at lower voltage levels. Eskom, we need Eskom, maybe first is rather a harsh word, but we need to move towards that reform part as well, because the Eskom is benefiting a great deal on municipalities having multiple bulk supply points unnecessarily so. This is something we could, heal just very quickly by consolidating these various supply points to make them ready to actually, buy at a transmission level and have those fewer, bulk supply points. Obviously, make a lot of savings also for reducing quite a lot of Eskom accounts within those bulk supply points. Also, we expect that the MFMA Section 42 will kick in once we all agree that this is what needs to happen with the NTC. And lastly, as my parting shot, Chairperson, we really should all be advocating for an entire industry reform roadmap. Otherwise, the puzzle won't fit. We'll find ourselves here amending the NTC license if we don't do things right the first time. Thank you, Chairperson.
Thank you, Tomoka, and thank you for an informative presentation. Members, if you can then maybe by show of hands indicate if you've got any questions or comments. Starting with yourself, Mr. Mkhize. Thank you.
Thanks, Chairperson, and thanks to Mr. Ngidi for the presentation. I'm just a bit puzzled, Mr. Ngidi. The change of this magnitude, one would think that there were prior consultations with organizations like SALCA, municipalities in some level, in some form. Haven't you had that engagement? And if not, how are you going to, what do you think is this should be salvaged between yourselves and ESCOM? Because I was looking at it, you may be agreeing with ESCOM on the delineation of transmission level vis-a-vis distribution level, for example, how you have defined and how those things could be taken into consideration, as well as the consolidation of bulk supply points. Because, and also from your side, that's putting it only maybe looking at the financial aspects of it and the technical reasons behind such separation that maybe force that kind of consolidation not to take place. Just want to get clarity on those issues, but mainly for me is looking at consultation prior to say with an entity like yourself. Thank you.
Any further questions, comments from members? If not, can I just, I've got one big broad question for you, Mr. Ngidi. Look, I'm not going to sit here and pretend that we have not, we've had lots of conversations in this regard. So I will not ask those questions that ordinarily one would have asked had we not been engaging previously on these matters. However, I just want to have one question to you. You know, you're making a few proposals. But the question that I'll ask is that in respect of these proposals that you make, yes, some of them we do identify as being policy proposals, but are there any of these proposals that you believe can be effected within the current regulatory framework? That is the current, before the ERA is amended, number one, and also the pricing policy is amended, and also before the actual ESI roadmap is then given effect. So are there, in your opinion, any of these, or rather, let me put this way, are the proposals, some of the proposals, especially in respect of the municipalities buying from NTC, as well as buying from distribution, providing willing services and stuff, such that everybody can then buy from transmission and the consolidation of those supply points. Can that be done within the current regulatory and policy framework? So that would be a broad question from me. But I was still hoping that the members may raise additional questions. But nonetheless, you've got your two questions, Mr. Ngidi. Or maybe just one thing that there is an application before us. Would you therefore then say in that application, the condition, if approved, one of the conditions would you agree with that the condition of the approval would be in accordance to what ESCOM has applied for, in that in the first few years NTC only has one customer as ESCOM distribution? Over to you, sir.
Thank you very much, Chairperson, and thank you, Kabazel, for the question. And I'm very happy that you asked this question. Yes, we are also surprised ourselves. When the president, I think it was in 2019, announced the intention to unbundle Eskom. We understand that there was a task team that was appointed to do that, and a few or all inverted commas key stakeholders were part of the process, and that excludes SALGA and municipalities. So we have raised this, that, unbundling of Eskom is going to affect greatly how municipalities operate, and we need to be part of the process. Unfortunately, we were not part of the process. For some odd reasons, I'm not sure. And this is why now we're going to find ourselves as if we are going at each other, as if we are opposing progress. And it's not necessarily the case. I can safely say that sitting and as a SALGA head of energy, SALGA have never been consulted on the Eskom unbundling and how it will take place. Even, the roadmap that was developed by the Ministry of Public Enterprises has zero input from SALGA. So I just wanted to be clear and be honest about that. And this is why we find ourselves here at this point in time. So you also asked about technical reasons to consolidate. I think that there's quite a lot of technical reasons. I think part of the financial reasons is also behind it, technical reasons that we don't have also bulk supply points at very low levels of voltages, because obviously this creates a whole lot of issues and disputes between Eskom and the municipalities. If you imagine municipalities that have 59 bulk supply points, and they have to actually have a dispute over each and every one of that, over each account of that, it's a bit of a problem. So for us, we're saying it's really not necessary that we still have an Eskom bulk supply point at 6.6 kV or even at 11 kV, maybe at 22 and above. That's fine. But even that, we could still consolidate a lot of bulk supply points into at least 66 kV and upwards, or maybe 33 as well. I know technically we would still have to deliberate on that with Eskom, network planners. So the next question from Umngoni is, can everything be done within the current regulatory framework? I'll be very precise. Consolidating chain of bulk supply points, yes, that can be done. In terms of municipalities buying at a transmission level, you see, this one is a bit of a problem, because it talks to policy issue and a policy announcement that needs to take place. But it's very unfortunate that policy pronunciation is not forthcoming, because this ship is moving, and it's gonna move with a flawed type of reform that is already taking place. And Chairperson, yes, it can happen. You can license the NTC right now as it is, but we're going to find ourselves here again trying to amend it, because obviously the proposals that we are making now, we will be making also in the future with the advocacy role that we are playing around the reforms of the whole ESI industry. I think you would agree with me, Chairperson. I'm not forcing you to agree that I think having not had a policy pronunciation or position that talks to the whole ESI reform, we are actually having a fundamentally flawed process going on right now. And we're going to find ourselves having to spend other resources and energy from your team, from the licensing team, and also from Eskom, reviewing the business process to actually allow for what we are proposing, because it makes sense. So yes, consolidation is, well, that is a discussion that has been between Eskom and municipalities for as long as I can remember. I think here and there the regulator has been involved, but not so much. But this is something that can happen within this current regulatory framework, Chair. The other issues are policy issues. So obviously, because as SALGA, we're making all the noise that we can. That's why we're saying we need other stakeholders to start talking about this. We need to start raising issues around the flawed process that we are actually moving towards, because really, if we're not having a roadmap of the whole ESI, we are moving forward with a fundamentally flawed process. Thank you, Chairperson. I hope I covered the questions.
Members, I think you agree with me that it was a useful presentation, and it would be very remiss of us to have considered this application without the participation of this key stakeholder. So on behalf of NESA, Mr. Ngiti, we really thank you and appreciate the short notice for you to have participated. But thank you for this presentation. Okay, so because there are no further questions, can I then go back to ESCOM, and we can afford ESCOM another 10, 20 minutes or so, which they don't have to take up, but they are well within their rights. Mr. Skeepers, the right of respect, the right of reform. Mr. Mabunda, and I see Mr. Mkiza's hand is up as well. Mr. Mabunda, guidance?
Chair, just for the record, I managed to get hold of Mr. Mpahlela, who confirmed that he's not presenting today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mabunda. Mr. Mkize, your hand was up just to inquire about Mr. Mpahlela. Thank you, Mr. Mkize. Thanks, colleagues, for the reminder. But we basically have come to the end of the presenters today, and I'd like to thank all of them for making time. But can I then ask Mr. Skeepers, are you up to taking up the opportunity to maybe redirect? And Ms. Tingit, you can unshare your presentation now. Thank you. Mr. Skeepers?
Thank you very much. We appreciate the opportunity. And firstly, just to acknowledge the different contributions from OUTA, from the members themselves, from SAPSI, from Ms. Peterson, and of course also SALGA. I think, Chair, we appreciate that most of the presenters are supportive of their licenses. And we do not take that support for granted. It is clear there are expectations in terms of transparency, accountability, and so on, which NTC will be expected to perform against. So thank you, Chair, for all of those contributions. There's maybe just 2 points that we would like to touch on briefly. I think the one, Chair, is related to the question that has come up a few times. We did endeavor to respond to it with regard to other players on the demand side engaging and procuring or buying power from NTC. I will request my colleague Keith Bowen just to again make a few remarks on that, and not too comprehensive, but just that we seek to clarify that aspect once more. Keith, if I can hand over to you.
Thank you. Thank you, Chair. I think the important thing to reiterate the info that we were talking about earlier is that there is no current regulation.
Apologies, Keith. So your screen is visible. Please unshare. We are seeing you typing emails now. Thanks. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I think the important thing to reiterate is that the regulatory framework at the moment is very much focused on retail tariffs, that we have the ERTSA process to establish retail tariffs for consumers. We do not have a wholesale electricity tariff framework in place. And potentially the creation of the NTC and the licensing thereof could actually create the framework to allow for such a development, whereas historically we've never had that. And I know we have discussed it in the past, the potential for wholesale tariff framework, and it's never been a priority, so it never was kind of carried through, but now we can do that once the NTC license is in place. And I think it's an important aspect, and it is in the long run or even in the medium term view of where we are going to go with the NTC, that there would be the opportunity for municipalities, other large power users to buy on a market or whatever mechanism in place at the wholesale level once that tariff is in place. I think an important aspect also to bear in mind that in the middle of an MYPD process, we've gone through a multi-year price determination. We have decisions at the retail level. It's very difficult to now, in the middle of that, go and throw in a wholesale tariff mechanism, which might upend what has already been decided. So the simplest, and perhaps it is an awkward one for the municipalities, for SALGA, but the simplest is to go with the process to create the NTC, maintain the integrity of the MYPD process and the IRSA, and work on the process to replace it eventually in 2 years' time at the end of the MYPD. So I think it's important that we're not disagreeing that this is potentially the where we go next. And we're not going to use the phrase end state, because I think end states are in their own kind of misnomer, but the idea that it would be the next step and that we would create this, but I do not believe it needs to be a predeterminant for creating the licensed entity. Thank you.
Thank you, Keith. Thank you, Keith. Appreciate it. And then perhaps just on one of the aspects that has come up, Chairman, regarding the Competition Act, just to request Advocate Bam to perhaps make a few remarks. If I can hand over to you, please, Advocate. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to be very brief because the answer to this is quite a narrow, straightforward answer. Having listened to Mr. Ngidi, it does seem to me that the issues he raised are as much raised in relation to the present dispensation as they might be raised in relation to some future dispensation. But they are raised in respect or with reference to the Competition Act in circumstances where the considerations for what may flow from what he raises are matters to be dealt with in the proper tribunal, and that would be the Competition Tribunal. And our courts have spoken about the demarcation of jurisdiction in that respect. What we're dealing with now is a licensing regime. Whether or not there are competition law issues, whether or not there's a breach of a competition of the Competition Act, something, of course, which we say is not the case, has never been raised previously with the Competition Tribunal where it should be raised. And to the extent that the implementation of the new transmission company in its policies and practices raise questions of concern flowing from the Competition Act, this will be dealt with where it should be dealt with, and that's in the Competition Tribunal. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Advocate Bam. Chair, if I may then try to wrap up, maybe just once more to reiterate our appreciation of this opportunity to make the case and give the overview of the transmission licenses for which we are applying. There's clearly a number of issues that as the regulator you will need to consider. Some of the more recent remarks, I think, also go more into the policy space, and I am sure those processes will unfold in due course. We do believe, Chair, in terms of the substantive issues and the submission that we've made, that it complies with the current Electricity Regulation Act, and we have endeavored to ensure that we address all the key issues that have been raised. We will take the 7 days that you afford us to respond more fully to some of the issues. But in essence, we just wish to thank you very much for this opportunity, as well as members of the public and stakeholders that have made a contribution in this submission. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Thank you very much to Eskom, to all the presenters today. And last but not least, to all of the stakeholders that may have joined us on all other NESA platforms that keep us honest in terms of our decision. Yes, in terms of our law, we are obliged to make decisions that are based on facts and evidence, and it is these processes that provide us with the facts and the evidence that we need to make those decisions. And to that effect, members of the public, just to note, this is but one part of one step in our process. There will be further processes. Some of them may be open, some of them may be closed to the public, but there will be further processes that NESA would be embarking on. Part of those processes would involve analyzing further the information that will come from all stakeholders. We have, again, we are affording stakeholders a further 7 days starting from today for further inputs in writing that will assist us in making a decision. And then, of course, just to indicate that when it comes to the tariffing issue, that, as indicated, has to have its own process, and but at the same time also taking into account that we've just gone through the MYPD5 process and the ERSA process, and the decisions made there are valid decisions of the energy regulator and need to be honored, and therefore there cannot be much change that will negate any of the issues or any of the decisions that have been made in respect of those processes. However, during that time, it gives us time for us to then better plan for the time beyond this MYPD5. So with that, I'd like to thank everybody for joining us today and invite you that if you can again join us on all of the other platforms when the members are deliberating on these applications, so at least you get greater appreciation of the decisions that NESA would then make further on. With that, I'd like to thank everybody today for participation. Thank you all. We can sign off. Thank you.